If you retire holding these assets, you made a mistake. When work stops, income doesn't magically continue. That is the first reality most people avoid thinking about. A paycheck hides inefficiencies. It forgives bad decisions. It covers mistakes quietly every month. Retirement removes that forgiveness. Expenses don't retire with you. Bills don't age out. Inflation doesn't slow down out of respect. What disappears is the steady inflow that once corrected poor positioning. This is why income matters more than assets the moment employment ends. During working years, people confuse accumulation with progress. They collect things, accounts, properties, and labels, believing ownership itself equals security. But ownership without income is just storage. Stored value does nothing unless it can be converted into cash flow without destroying itself. In retirement, selling becomes harder, timing becomes critical, and mistakes become permanent. Income replaces employment not because it sounds smart, but because it is the only mechanism that keeps life running without liquidation. Employment income is active. It demands time, energy, and presence. Retirement income must be passive or semi-passive. It must arrive whether you feel motivated or not. This distinction changes everything. Assets that looked impressive while working can become burdens when the paycheck stops. Without income, you are forced to sell pieces of your life to survive. Selling is not strategy, it is erosion. The problem is that most people reach retirement with assets designed for growth, not distribution. Growth assets assume time, patience, and the ability to wait out volatility. Retirement removes time from the equation. Volatility that once felt tolerable becomes dangerous because recovery windows shrink. Income-producing structures smooth this volatility by paying regardless of market mood. They reduce dependency on timing. Timing is the enemy of retirees. Income also provides psychological stability. When money arrives predictably, decisions improve. Fear decreases. Reaction slows. Without income, every market movement feels personal. Every expense feels heavier. This emotional pressure leads to poor choices, panic selling, or over-conservatism that quietly erodes purchasing power. Income creates breathing room. Breathing room protects judgment. Many people believe they can simply withdraw from accumulated assets. This approach assumes markets cooperate and expenses remain predictable. Neither assumption is reliable. Withdrawals expose you to sequence risk, the danger of needing money during downturns. Early losses compound negatively when withdrawals are required. Income buffers against this by reducing the need to sell during unfavorable conditions. Income is not just about money, it is about control. Control over timing, control over lifestyle, control over response. When income exists, assets can be held longer, sold strategically, or passed on. Without income, assets dictate behavior. You become reactive. Retirement should increase freedom, not reduce it. Another overlooked factor is inflation. Inflation is subtle but relentless. Fixed pools of money shrink in real terms. Income that adjusts or grows offsets this erosion. Without income growth, purchasing power declines even if account balances appear stable. People feel richer on paper and poorer in reality. Income aligned with inflation preserves dignity. Healthcare costs amplify this issue. Medical expenses are unpredictable and often increase with age. Income absorbs shocks. Without it, unexpected costs force asset liquidation at the worst times. Planning for averages fails because life does not operate on averages. Income planning prepares for variability. There is also the issue of mental energy. Managing withdrawals, timing sales, and worrying about balances consumes attention. Retirement should free mental space, not occupy it with constant calculation. Income simplifies life. It reduces the number of decisions that must be made under stress. Simplicity is underrated, especially when cognitive energy becomes more valuable than physical energy. Income-producing assets also shift focus from valuation to performance. Instead of obsessing over price movements, attention moves to reliability and sustainability. This mindset aligns better with retirement needs. Performance pays bills. Valuation feeds ego. Ego does not cover expenses. Some fear that focusing on income limits growth. In retirement, growth without income is incomplete. Growth must serve distribution, otherwise it remains theoretical. The goal is not maximum return, it is maximum reliability adjusted for risk. Income enforces discipline by demanding that assets justify their place continuously. Employment income trained people to think linearly, work equals pay. Retirement requires systems thinking, systems that operate without constant input. Income streams are systems. Lump sums are not. Systems endure, lump sums decay. When income replaces employment, retirement becomes a transition, not a cliff. Life continues with structure. Without it, retirement feels like a slow countdown watching balances decline. One path feels expansive, the other feels defensive. The uncomfortable truth is that many popular assets are celebrated during accumulation, but harmful during distribution. They shine when money is coming in and fail when money must come out. Recognizing this requires separating emotional attachment from functional utility. Assets must earn their keep when employment ends. Income does not mean stagnation. It means sustainability. Sustainable finances outlast impressive ones. Outlasting is underrated until time becomes the primary variable. At that stage, reliability becomes wealth. Retirement exposes reality. It removes excuses. It forces assets to reveal whether they support life or simply look good on statements. When income replaces employment, dignity is preserved, choice remains intact, and fear loses leverage. An asset that does not produce income behaves very differently once life shifts from accumulation to preservation. While working, non-paying assets feel harmless. They sit quietly, promising future value, appreciating on paper, requiring patience more than performance. The paycheck masks their inefficiency. It fills gaps, it absorbs costs, it allows people to wait. When that paycheck disappears, the true nature of these assets reveals itself. Non-paying assets demand trust in timing. They assume you will be able to sell when you want, at a price you like, under conditions you cannot control. That assumption is fragile. Markets do not move according to personal timelines. Buyers disappear during uncertainty. Prices compress when liquidity dries up. What once felt solid becomes illiquid precisely when certainty matters most. The danger is not volatility alone. It is dependency. When income stops, expenses begin leaning on assets. If an asset does not generate cash, it must eventually be sold to meet needs. That sale converts theoretical value into real risk. You are no longer an owner waiting for growth. You are a seller hoping for favorable conditions. Hope is not leverage. Non-paying assets also create a false sense of security because their value is visible but unusable. Statements show balances. Appraisals show worth. But value that cannot be accessed without consequence is not functional. It cannot pay bills without shrinking itself. Each withdrawal reduces future capacity. This creates a slow bleed that feels manageable at first and alarming later. Maintenance costs compound this problem. Assets that do not pay you often still demand resources. Taxes, insurance, upkeep, compliance, and time all extract value continuously. These costs are small individually but relentless collectively. Without income to offset them, they accelerate erosion. The asset becomes a consumer instead of a contributor. There is also an emotional trap. People form attachments to non-paying assets because they represent past success. Letting go feels like undoing years of effort. This attachment delays rational decisions. People hold longer than they should, waiting for better conditions that may never arrive. Emotional ownership replaces strategic ownership. Liquidity risk increases with age. Time reduces tolerance for error. Recovery windows shrink. Non-paying assets force reliance on market conditions rather than internal cash flow. This shifts control outward. Control is lost not in dramatic moments, but in small compromises made to avoid selling at a loss. Over time, these compromises accumulate into constrained living. Inflation exposes another weakness. Non-paying assets do not adjust unless sold and reinvested. Meanwhile, costs rise steadily. Purchasing power declines invisibly. What once covered expenses comfortably begins to fall short. Without income growth, lifestyle compression becomes inevitable. People adjust downward slowly, often without noticing until options narrow. Taxes further complicate matters. Selling non-paying assets can trigger tax events that reduce net proceeds. Timing sales around tax efficiency adds another layer of complexity. Complexity increases stress. Stress leads to mistakes. Income smooths tax planning by spreading exposure over time rather than concentrating it in forced sales. Non-paying assets also distort behavior. They encourage speculation over performance. Attention shifts to price movements instead of reliability. This mindset is manageable during earning years, but destabilizing later. Watching markets daily becomes emotionally exhausting when outcomes affect basic needs. Income reduces this emotional volatility by decoupling daily expenses from market fluctuations. Another overlooked cost is opportunity. Capital locked in non-paying assets cannot be redeployed easily. It sits waiting for appreciation that may or may not come. Meanwhile, opportunities requiring liquidity pass by. In retirement, opportunity cost is not about maximizing upside. It is about minimizing regret. Regret often comes from missed chances to simplify earlier. Non-paying assets also complicate estate planning. Heirs inherit complexity instead of clarity. Assets must be managed, sold, or maintained. Income streams are easier to transfer, divide, or continue. Complexity creates friction at a time when simplicity is most valuable. There is a psychological L shift that occurs when assets pay you. You begin evaluating worth based on contribution rather than appearance. Non-paying assets reverse this logic. They ask to be believed in rather than proven. Belief fades under pressure. Proof endures. Some argue that non-paying assets provide diversification. Diversification without income is incomplete. It spreads risk but does not solve cash flow. Cash flow is the mechanism that converts diversification into livability. Without it, diversification is theoretical protection. As retirement approaches, the margin for error narrows. Assets must justify their presence daily. Non-paying assets fail this test quietly. They do not announce danger. They simply underperform when performance matters most. Toxicity is not sudden, it is cumulative. Toxic assets are not defined by loss alone. They are defined by mismatch. A mismatch between what an asset does and what life requires. In retirement, life requires reliability, liquidity, and predictability. Non-paying assets offer uncertainty, dependency, and hope. Hope is fragile when time is finite. Selling non-paying assets earlier is not pessimism. It is alignment. It is recognizing that the function of money changes with life stages. What worked during accumulation may harm during distribution. Refusing to adjust is not loyalty, it is inertia. When income stops, every asset becomes a question. Does it pay? Does it protect? Does it simplify? If the answer is no, the asset becomes a liability, regardless of its market value. Value without function is decoration. The transition from growth to preservation requires courage. It requires letting go of symbols and focusing on mechanics. Mechanics pay bills, symbols do not. Non-paying assets are symbols of past strategy, not tools for future stability. True security comes from assets that share the burden of living. Assets that participate rather than observe. When assets contribute, life feels supported. When they do not, life feels managed. The most dangerous moment is when non-paying assets still look successful. That is when action feels unnecessary. Delay sets in, time passes, conditions change. By the time reality forces a decision, options are fewer and costs are higher. Non-paying assets do not fail loudly. They fail by slowly transferring pressure onto the owner. Pressure accumulates as stress, limitation, and reduced choice. Recognizing this early preserves autonomy. When assets stop paying, they start asking for patience, asking for belief, asking for sacrifice. Retirement is not the stage for asking, it is the stage for receiving.